Good evening and welcome to our well-anticipated talk about Italian Jewry, Italian Jews, Italian Jewry. Before I begin, I want to give a very important shout out. If you're planning to go on a trip to Rome, make sure you use a local Jewish guide. Why? Because there are about 4,000 licensed guides and only I think 10 or so are Jewish. So if you're going to go to Rome, make sure you do it with a guide that knows not only the general history of Rome, but also is very familiar with the Jewish history of the city, which is obviously very, very ancient. It's interesting. The history of Jews in Rome is one of the oldest in the world. What is the oldest Jewish community in the world? If you ask yourself, what's the oldest Jewish community in the world? Yeah? Good answer, Babylonia and Iraq, but it's not continuous, meaning, to the best of my knowledge, there's no Jews living there right now. I know, yeah. So the question is, what's the oldest one? Now, it could be Iran, Persia, but it also could be Italy, because there have been Jews living in Italy nonstop since very, very, very early on. I'll tell you in a second how early. Italian Jews is something that's very worth studying for several reasons. First of all, it's the oldest, or maybe second only to Persia, Jewish community that's continuous from back then until this day. The second thing is they happen to be in an important neighborhood. Why? Because they are where the Roman Empire sat. And so Jews living in Italy were living in an empire that it's not a big COVID, as we would say in Yiddish, but they were sitting in the city of the empire that went and conquered and destroyed Israel, but also that the Jews lived under for more than 100 years. Then the Jews of Italy, and that's true to this day, also lived in the same area as the Vatican. And so a lot of the issues that pertain to the relationship between Jews and Christianity impacting many, many billions of people also are sort of local politics. And more than once, a pope went and visited the local Jewish community in Rome when wanting to make an announcement about, warming up relationships with Jews. So the Jews of Rome are very, very important, both in the sense of it being the Roman Empire, it being the seat of the Vatican, it being so old. And what other very important thing happened in Italy? Very, very, very important, especially to us, the Ghetto, but to us, people of the book, the printing press, the first Talmud, the first Chumash, the first Sansino was in Italy. So a lot of the books that ended up coming to Eastern Europe, to Western Europe, were the products of Italian Jewry's work. So it's very important to recognize how Italian Jews may have not been huge in number, the same way Polish Jews or Moroccan Jews or Spanish Jews were, but nonetheless, they are essential to understanding our history and to what was going on in the Jewish world. Another interesting thing is Italy is the first exporter of Judaism to Ashkenaz. The first family, the famous Colonials family. Does anyone know someone named Colonials? It's not a common name today. It used to be before the Holocaust. Colonials is a Greek word. It's a Greek name. It means a good name. They have a good name. And it's the family that left Italy to establish the first Jewish community in Mainz. The three big first Jewish community, Magenza, Worms, and Speyer. The pioneers of these communities in Ashkenaz were actually Jews from Italy. So the Torah went, so to speak, from Jerusalem to Rome, and also from Rome to Ashkenaz. And to this day, by the way, there's, I believe, a synagogue downtown. Is anyone familiar with that synagogue downtown? There's a synagogue downtown of it. I know where Len used to love that shul. There's a synagogue downtown of Italian Jews, and they have a special nusach. We have our prayer books are sometimes Ashkenaz, sometimes they're Sephardic. There's something called the Italiano nusach, meaning Italian Jews have their own form of prayer. Interesting fact about Italian prayer is that they say Kol Nidre in Hebrew. They say it not in Aramaic like we do, but they say it in Hebrew. So Italian Jews really, really go a long way back, and they carry a very, very special and ancient tradition. I remember when I visited Rome, it was a very special feeling because I landed in the airport and we're waiting to get out of the airport in Rome. And in the meantime, I decided I would take advantage of the time. And so I pulled out my phone and I decided I'm going to study some Mishnah. So I'm looking at my phone, I'm studying Mishnah, and in the Mishnah it says, Rabbi Akiva says so-and-so. And I thought to myself, what an incredible turn of events in history, where Rabbi Akiva was a Jew who was denigrated and butchered by the Romans 2,000 years ago in Israel. And here he is 2,000 years later, and nobody really knows anything about those who killed him. And his words are studied in schools, in yeshivas, even in Rome. So in a way, the survival of the Jewish people, especially in Rome, is a triumph over Rome, trying to destroy us. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this, but the term in the Talmud, it's a pretty sharp term, Malchut HaRish'ah, the wicked kingdom, is referring to, we say it, I believe, also in Maoz Tzur, Malchut HaRish'ah is the wicked kingdom, and that it refers to Rome, because obviously Rome did not deal with Jerusalem with silk gloves. It was pretty brutal. But the history of Jews in Rome actually goes back long before the destruction of the Second Temple. When we think of Hanukkah, what do we think? We think, oh, the Maccabees, they claimed independence from Greece. And what happens next in history? Fast forward 150, 200 years, and you have the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans who just invaded. No, right after the Hasmoneans win, right after the Maccabees win, they send a letter to Rome and they start building a relationship. They send a delegation. Now, here's what's going to blow your mind. When they send a delegation to Rome, this is about 156 BCE, there's a Jewish community in Rome. It's like when the Israelis come and to Washington, D.C., and they go to a local Jewish restaurant in D.C. and they use the local synagogue. There was already a Jewish community in Rome at the time. And later on, you have a more established community established by Jews from Alexandria. We tend to think about our history. We think of it like, oh, after the destruction of the Second Temple, we all scattered. Jews were scattered even before the destruction of the Second Temple. We know there was the destruction of the First Temple. So there were Jews in Rome from this time of 150 years BCE. And they go a long way back. There's a fascinating story in the Jerusalem Talmud that shares the story of rabbis who would go lobby Rome. Rabbis would take ships and they would go lobby Rome. One of these rabbis is Rabbi Akiva. It says Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabban Gamliel, they go to Rome. As their ship lands, probably not in Rome, because Rome is not on the sea, they see a group of Jewish kids. And the group of Jewish kids take a pile of dirt or stubble or something together, and they start separating from it pieces. And they say, this is how they do it in Israel. What are they referring to? In Israel, when you want to eat fruits or vegetables or grain, you have to separate the tithes. So you have to say, Cheruma goes here, Maser Rishon goes here. So the rabbis say they go to Italy. Can you imagine a rabbi going, he feels like he's in a universe that's completely different, and he sees the children, the Jewish children in Rome, sort of like Jewish children in day schools learn today about the laws of the Torah. They're separating pieces off of these off of this chunk of dirt, and they say, this is how it's done in Israel. This is how people eat in Israel. I'm sure their hearts were very much warmed up by the scene, and so then they go on and they see a Jewish community there. And in fact, the oldest synagogue in the world that I'm aware of is in Italy. Interestingly, I'll mention it later. It's the Synagogue of Ostia, but basically it's a synagogue that predates synagogues, if you can say such a thing. It's a synagogue that was discovered, it was dug up in the 1960s, and it dates back to before the destruction of the Second Temple. Interestingly, it's not facing Jerusalem. It's just on its own. Another interesting thing, it has carvings in it of a menorah. We're going to see fascinating. The menorah was very, very popular in Italy, more than, say, in Babylonia, etc. The menorah as a symbol of like a Magen David, as a symbol of Judaism, is very, very, very popular in Italy. So you have Jews living there, you have the synagogue, you have the symbols, and there's, interestingly, also a lot of underground cemeteries. You know how today when someone is buried, they go to basically a cemetery and they bury them in the ground. And that is not how things were done. Even in the Mishnah, it's mentioned that this is not how it was done. And actually in Israel, it's a big debate now if to go back to this. But what they would do is called a catacomb. The body would sit for a year and dry until you had only bones. And they would put the bones in a cave together with the bones of the whole family. And so in Rome, they have many, Rome, and not only Rome, around Italy, many Jewish catacombs. It's an amazing thing to see. The pictures dating back to the 1st and 2nd century of cemeteries in Italy, with writing on them in Roman, and they have these menorahs and a shofar and an etrog. It really touches the heart because it lets you know of a Judaism that existed so much longer before we knew about diaspora Judaism. We think of diaspora Judaism in much later terms. There was a strong diaspora Judaism even before the destruction of the Second Temple. It's to me, it's mind-boggling. So the Jews of Rome loved actually Julius Caesar. They're very sad when he dies, when he gets killed. The Jews are a part of Roman society. They're not slaves, they're equals, and they're part of Roman society. But all the honeymoon between Jews and Rome comes to an end. Obviously, when you have the Great Rebellion. The Great Rebellion against Rome in the year 67 to 70 puts a war between Rome and Jerusalem. And this is when, does anyone know how many slaves arrived from Israel in Rome? How you want to guess? Anyone?
200,000.
Well, that would be a lot, but it's not far off. More than 90,000 Jewish slaves. Think about that. More than 90,000 Jewish slaves arrive in Italy. Now, if you think that the appeal of the Federation or whatever local charity is sending you a donation request is heavy, ask yourself what it meant to be a Jew in Rome then. Jews worked tirelessly on a mitzvah called Pidyon Shvuyim, redeeming the captive. And so Jews had to work one by one to redeem Jewish slaves. Obviously, not everyone was redeemed, but interestingly, also Romans redeemed certain Jewish slaves. We're going to see that, but it's very interesting. So also Romans helped redeem Jews, but basically Jews are washing up so much so that the price of slaves across the empire goes down because they take so many slaves from Israel. Another thing that happens is they have a huge amount of wealth, which you can see this plate to this day. What does Rome use the wealth that they get from conquering Judea for? They build a lovely building called the Coliseum. Not far from the Coliseum, there's this plate that basically says we used all this is already in the year 86, I believe. We used all this wealth that we got to build this building, and then others get into more speculative things, which is who built it? Was it the Jewish slaves or other slaves? But the bottom line is that the wealth that came from the destruction of Judea was brought from Israel. There's a very famous Midrash, a Jewish Talmudic source that says if someone tells you that Jerusalem is built and Rome is built, don't believe them. If someone tells you that Rome is destroyed and Jerusalem is destroyed, don't believe them. If someone tells you that Jerusalem is destroyed and Rome is built, or Rome is destroyed and Jerusalem is built, believe them. Meaning the rabbis saw Rome and Jerusalem as one coming at the expense of the other. If you destroy Jerusalem, that's when you have Rome. And sort of the way they saw it was that ultimately the Malchut Harisha, which is easy to see why they thought of it that way in those days, is going to be destroyed. And that's when Jerusalem will be rebuilt. It's interesting. On this plate near the Coliseum, I'll just read you the exact wording. The Emperor Vespasian ordered this new amphitheater to be created from his general's share of the booty. So basically, they build this huge Coliseum from the Jewish money. It's funny because a lot of people falsely believe that the menorah from the temple is in the Vatican basement, which is not true because the Vatican was built after the year 1000. But what is probably true is that the Colosseum and a lot of the wealth that came to Rome came from the destruction and plundering of Judea. So that is the story in terms of the influx of slaves into Rome. And what happens next is you have the building of the Arch of Titus. Interestingly, if you want to look for a villain in the story, not that there's a shortage, but in the story of the destruction of Jerusalem, who is the lover of Titus who destroys Jerusalem? Bernike, or Bernice. She's a Hasmonean queen. She's a Jewish woman, and she's a member of the Hashmonai family. And she's hanging out with Titus even before he destroys Jerusalem. She tries to get her way because she was thrown out of power, and she doesn't. And she basically sits with Titus from the outside watching him burn Jerusalem. And then she moves to Rome, and she's his unofficial wife until the people in Rome start saying what we would say in Yiddish, "Pas nicht, how are you hanging out with this non-Roman Jewish woman as your wife?" But it's a long love affair. So it just shows you how embedded in many ways Jews were in Rome and how comfortable they felt. Interestingly, a lot of Romans were influenced by Judaism. The ideology of Judaism was very appealing to many Romans. You have in every Chumash, you have the translation of Onkelos. There were many Romans who converted to Judaism. It was not uncommon. And so the fact that Jews lived in Rome helped sort of spread the ideology of Judaism, and in a very ironic way, paved the way for Christianity to take over Rome, because the Romans already knew a lot about Judaism. The idea of monotheism was appealing to many of the intellectuals in the high society. And so by the time Christianity came around, this whole idea of monotheism was not foreign for them. Now, once the war broke out between Rome and Judea, that's when things started getting a bit more uncomfortable for Jews. And there was, for the first time, probably in history, a Jewish tax. What was the Jewish tax? Basically, whatever money you guys used to send to the temple in Jerusalem, the half a shekel, that we announce, I believe it's the week before Purim, 2 weeks before Purim, right? It's at the Rosh Chodesh Adar, not far from now. Whatever money you've been sending to the temple in Jerusalem, now you're going to be sending to the temple of Zeus or whatever it is here in Rome. So the Romans, in a way, hold all the Jews guilty of what's going on in Jerusalem, which is in a way is true because the Jews of the diaspora very much financially support Jerusalem. So once it's destroyed, they start giving the Jews a tax. Now, has anyone ever been to Rome? Anyone ever been to the? Yeah. Has anyone ever been to the Arch of Titus? Yes. For 2,000 years, Jews had a practice and an unofficial ban of against going under the Arch of Titus. There was a prohibition. Why? Because the Arch of Titus was the symbol of humiliating the Jews, of winning them, of replacing their God. It was sort of like the Roman going all out with the okay, we won completely. And so Jews didn't want to give that any credit. And so they never marched under the Arch of Titus. Interestingly, when did Jews start going under the Arch of Titus? So it's very interesting. 1947, after the UN had the partition plan vote, the Jews in Rome, many of which were DP refugees, Holocaust survivors, they go to the Arch of Titus. They're led by Rabbi David Prado, the chief rabbi of Rome, and he tries to speak and he can't because it's just such an emotional moment. And they march under the Arch of Titus in the opposite direction, meaning we're not going from Jerusalem to be expelled to Rome. It's almost like, you know what, there's on Tisha B'Av, one of the Lamentations contrasts when I leave Jerusalem. And so the Jews now in 1947 feel like history has been closed. What influence does this have on the modern state of Israel? Does anyone know the Arch of Titus and the state of Israel? Anyone here ever have an Israeli passport or go to Israeli passport? What's the
menorah?
Ah, very good. All right.
On the passport.
On the passport, it's a menorah. And the Israeli symbol, if you've ever been to the Israeli embassy or any official document, etc., is the menorah. What's the idea? The idea was that the Arch of Titus was the symbol of the end of this Judea place that caused the Romans so much trouble. And David Ben-Gurion very wisely and symbolically in 1947-48 says, you know what the symbol of our state is going to be? Not the flag, but the symbol. It's going to be a menorah. And that's why if you go outside the Knesset, they have that huge menorah, which is a subject in and of itself. But basically, the Jews of Rome, back to the Jews of Rome, this is when they feel for the first time that the circle has closed and that they have closure. But back to Rome, another interesting evidence of the fact that you have so many Jews in Rome, Pompeii, in the year 79, you're all familiar with the volcano. Yeah. It destroys Pompeii. It blew my mind when I saw this. One of the houses, they have an inscription that says Sodom and Amorah. Why? Because if you were a slave who was schlepped out of Judea and you were brought to this place which violated every single moral and religious regulation you believed in, what would you think of this place? Sodom and Amorah. And so they have, you can imagine, what this slave from Judea was thinking, that he carved on the house he was working in, Sodom and Amorah, and this was found obviously only many thousand years later. Another interesting finding in terms of the slaves that came and shaped Italian Jewry, there's a very, very interesting grave found around Naples that has actually, someone wrote a book about it that's more of a novel, but with romance and everything. But I'll tell you the facts, and then you can take it to whatever novel or imagination you want to take it. But the tombstone from the 2nd century reads, Claudia Astor, some say Esther, Claudia Astor, captive from Jerusalem. Literally, it says that, captive from Jerusalem. Tiberius Claudius Proculus, imperial freedman, took care of this epitaph. I ask you to make sure through the law that you take care that no one casts down my inscription. So it's interesting. You see someone who's a genuine Roman, and he's taking care of this young Jewish woman. It says, I think she died at 26, and he takes care of her and wants to make sure that the tombstone that she has remains there. Now, obviously, you can, make a whole love story of this and what it meant for her to go all the way from Jerusalem to be the captive of this Roman free person. There's a lot of that, but yeah, there's this evidence of Jews in Rome that long ago. And also you have this regular documentation of Jewish rabbis going to Rome, especially Rabbi Akiva, who was later one of the leaders of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. But Jews actually felt very, very comfortable in Rome. The only thing that I would say that sometimes boggles my mind is you wonder, if Jews were so well assimilated into Rome, were there any Jewish soldiers that were called into the Roman army? Because that would be quite the drama as well, right? Because if you're expected to join the Roman army and then you're sent to war to destroy the temple, who knows if there were such cases, but definitely you have the case of Bernice, where she joins Titus because she feels that as a Hasmonean, she deserves the kingdom, and therefore she joins him and is his lover for the rest of his life. All right, so this is the basically the good times for Jews in Rome. Obviously, not good if you're a slave from Judea who's brought to work in Rome, but slowly but surely, many of them were redeemed. And I think it just speaks so beautifully about the beauty of the Jewish people. You think about that, you have a small Jewish community, suddenly an influx of 90,000 slaves, and what was done to make sure that each and every one of these, not each and every one, but as many as possible are redeemed. I think that's a very, very beautiful point. Now comes a big change to Italy. What's the big change? Christianity. In the year 313, Constantine converts to Christianity, and the Jews of Italy, life changes for them. It's counterintuitive because Christianity should be a religion that's sort of closer to Judaism, but it only made things worse for the Jews in Italy. There are more and more laws restricting Jewish life, and the number of Jews in Rome not only doesn't grow rapidly, but shrinks a bit. The Jews are not doing great. Interestingly, the people who do protect Jews often until the 1100s are the popes. So the Pope is usually someone who issues a protection of the Jews, and it's only after you have the Crusades and all that that the situation of Jews worsens. But in general, Jews are not doing well in Rome and in Italy, and they start migrating. And they go and they migrate to Ashkenaz, most famously, the Colonials family that founds, you're going to hear that name a lot of times, I'm sorry. But basically, they are considered like, it's like, what are the names of those families on the Mayflower? There's like a few names that... Yeah, basically, it's like the people. So the Colonials family was like an aristocracy of Jews in Rome, and they go on... What family? Colonials. Colonials means a beautiful name, and they go on to found Ashkenaz Jewry in Worms, Speyer, and Mainz. Nonetheless, Jews are succeeding in Rome, and there's a production of the first Hebrew dictionary, the first Talmudic dictionary, and it's famously called the Sefer HaAruch. So there is Jews there are Jews living in Italy, and conditions are good. Similar, remember what I told you that Poland, Jews said it's Polin, like you should live here and it's good. Jews in Italy also thought things were pretty good for them, and they called it Italia, which means the island, Ital of do, and Ya from God. So they thought of it as the island of God's do, and they really did, those who lived there did enjoy themselves. And it's interesting, the Italian people, I just want to give here a shout out, I guess, to the Italian people, because throughout our existence in Italy, the Italian people have been very, very good to the Jews, relatively speaking, to the rest of Europe. When there were decrees against the Jews, including the Holocaust, the Italian population very much did not comply. The most violated papal order against Jews was the order that you're not allowed to have a Jewish physician. It was violated even by the popes themselves. They issued this thing, you can't have a Jewish doctor, and they used Jewish doctors. So in general, while life in Italy was not rosy for the Jews, the Italian people themselves did not engage in the same kinds of pogroms and mass murders that you saw in other places in Europe. By and large, the Italian people were very, very tolerant and friendly to the Jewish people. So much so, it's funny how Jews really we tend to rationalize our predicament. The Jews of Italy used to paraphrase the verse from Tanakh, and they would say, Ki mi bari tetze Torah udvar Hashem me'ontranto. Basically, different Italian cities, and instead of, I think we even have it, no, we don't have it here. Instead of Ki mitzion tetze Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, they would have the names of these two cities, which were centers for Torah study, and they felt very, very good about themselves. Torah scholarship thrives, and now things change not only for Jews in Italy, but also in Ashkenaz. When you have the First Crusade in 1096, by the way, you have the worsening of the situation of Jews in Italy. It's not nearly as bad as the Jews in Ashkenaz. The Jews in Ashkenaz really suffer, but this is when you have Jews expelled from Bologna. Another very important point, Italy is not one country. It's not till the 1800s that you have, Italy unite into one country. But you have different provinces, different republics. And so it's important to note that if the situation in one place in Italy was one, doesn't necessarily mean that was the same for the other Jewish community, but things worsen for Italian Jews. They are still doctors, they are still at the forefront of many fields, especially translation. In fact, they're employed by the Vatican. It's kind of funny. The Jews are translating Greek works that were translated into Arabic from Arabic into Italian. So instead of the Italians just turning to their Greek neighbors for translation, what they do is they get the manuscripts from the Arab world, which is a thriving intellectual world, and they have the Jews translate what was, for example, Aristotle, who was translated into Arabic back into Italian. So the Jews are working still in good positions, but things are getting tighter and tighter, and they're getting very difficult. Finally, things get to a boiling point where you have Pope Innocent III, and he really starts making things very, very, very difficult for the Jews in the year 1198. Then you have Pope Gregory rescinding some of it. It's interesting. You see a lot of times in the news today stuff, Israel killed this person, Israel's killing children in Gaza, all kinds of accusations that are most often false. In 1235, Pope Gregory in Italy issues a decree against accusing Jews of ritual murder, because people already then were accusing Jews for nothing. And so it's sort of an on and off for Jews, but eventually things do get pretty bad. Bad though they are, they're not too terrible. And so when the Spanish expulsion comes around, the Italian Jews are very helpful to the Jews that are expelled from Spain. 6,000 Spanish Jews come to Italy, which is a lot. It's probably around 6% of Spanish Jews. They come to Italy and they settle down. That's why today, even to this day, in Italy, it's the only country I know that's like that except for Israel. Well, and America, which is also migrants, but you'll have in Italy what you didn't have in any other European country, different cities with different nusachs, meaning you'll have a congregation of Spanish Jews in one city, you'll have a congregation of Ashkenaz Jews in another city, you'll have Turkish, you'll have nusach Italki.
Libyan.
I don't know, whatever it is, there are all kinds of different communities, all this inside Italy. And so the Spanish Jews also come to Italy. They're very much helped. There's a fellow named Yechiel of Pisa, who's the biggest banker in Italy, and he helps a lot of Jews. And you have one of my favorite people. Has anyone ever heard of Dona Grazia? No, she's one of the greatest Jewish heroes of the time, and of all times in many ways. Dona Grazia, and if you want her full name, her name is Dona Grazia Mendes Nasi. She is from Portugal. She's born to a converso family, meaning she was born to families practicing Christianity but is Jewish. And finally, she gets out of Spain, and she arrives in Venice. She arrives in Venice and she fearlessly starts advocating for Spanish Jews. She uses a lot of her wealth to help resettle them. She uses her wealth to influence that there shouldn't be boycotts of Jews. When there's a city in Italy that starts persecuting Jews, she starts organizing a boycott of that city. She's a very feisty woman. She then moves to Turkey, to Kushta, and she, in a way, I think she can be considered the mother of modern Zionism. Why? She lobbies the Sultan, and she says, I want to lease a city. What city does she lease? Tveria. She didn't end up living long enough to move there, but she buys the first land of Jews in Tveria coming back, and that is the first colony of Jews returning to Israel. So this Dona Grazia is a really feisty woman. She's fearless in terms of advocating for other Jews, and also in terms of resettling the Jews in the land of Israel. There's a area in Tveria named for her, but she starts the Shivat Zion process already in the 1500s. And so there's I think many Jews would start moving then. 1500s is when things get terrible for Jews in Italy. The first ghetto in the world is in Italy. By the way, a ghetto, it comes from the word, it's like kind of factory in Italy. It's where you have the furnace that boils the metal. I think it's called a foundry. And that's what a ghetto means. It was just near this factory in Venice. And this is when you have the really beginning of serious persecution of Jews in Italy. There's the papal order of 1555. And he makes the Pope of the time, Pope Paul IV, makes 5 rules. First of all, he makes a ghetto in Rome. Second of all, a lot of people don't know that started there, the yellow badges, the ones that we associate with the Holocaust. Every Jew had to wear a yellow badge when you left the ghetto so that you can be recognized that you're not one of the Christians. Then, interesting idea, 1 synagogue per city, no Sephardic synagogue, Ashkenazi synagogue, only 1 synagogue per city, and also sort of has echoes of what happens later in the Holocaust. He has the Jews restore the wall of Rome for no pay, meaning the Jews living in Rome had to go out, pull up their sleeves, and build the wall of Rome again, and for no pay. And then in some areas following this, the Jews are expelled altogether. This being said, the Jews are still very vibrant. And as the printing press comes to Italy, for those who wonder why the printing press was invented in Germany, but why does Italy become such a center for printing? They produce excellent and high quality paper for a cheap price. So the books, the first Talmud, the first Chumash, the first commentary of Rashi, all these books are being printed in Italy. And in that sense, if you're an Italian Jew, you're very lucky. Why? Because your books are more likely to be printed. If you're a great scholar living in Krakow, good luck with your intellectual pursuits. Good luck with publishing. But if you're an Italian rabbi, you're living right there. It's great. You're able to publish it, which is how you get amazing scholars like Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, and other great scholars. When do things start getting a bit better for Italian Jews? Well, Napoleon comes into the picture, and he hears about the persecution of Jews, and he starts asking what's going on, how are they being persecuted, and so the Jews become huge Napoleon fans because they know that when he comes, they'll be liberated. Finally, I just want to add a very important story, which also has to do with Napoleon. The story of Edgardo Mortara. Anyone familiar with the story? There's a Spielberg movie. I heard of that Spielberg. There's a movie coming about this story. Whether Spielberg does it all or not, I don't know. But there's a very, very heart-wrenching story, which actually has major geopolitical implications. There's a Jewish family named the Mortara family. This family has a non-Jewish aide, and she helps them, especially on Shabbat, where it's convenient to have someone who isn't Jewish do some things that you can't do. So the child, Edgardo, gets sick, and she decides, out of the goodness of her heart, quote unquote, since the child's about to die anyways, I'm going to convert him to Catholicism. So she converts this sick Jewish child in the house she works in to Catholicism. And she doesn't tell anyone a thing. The child gets better. He doesn't die. So the time goes by, and she starts sharing with friends this story that I used to work for a Jewish family, and their child, I baptized their child, or not baptized, sorry, I don't know, whatever the term is when you're Catholic. I converted as their child. She converts the child, and one of the high-ranking priests in the area, he says, what do you mean? The child's a Catholic kid. It doesn't matter that you did it because he was sick, because you thought he died. He is a Catholic, and it's against the law to convert or to live as a Jew if you're actually Catholic. The Pope gets involved, and this is one of the things that convinces Napoleon to take over Italy. The Pope gets involved, and he intervenes, and the child is taken away from his family. And this is a fundamental story in the history of Italian Jewry and in the history of Jewry as a whole, because the Jews of Italy start communicating with the Jews in France. And this is when the Alliance des Israélites, I think, am I pronouncing it right? The Alliance is formed because of this story. The Jews realize we have to get together. And this Edgardo has a terrible life because he's shuttled back and forth. Eventually, he's sent to a convent. And ironically, even though later on he's not forced to live as a Christian, by the time he's 20, he's trying to convert his own mom, who Nebuch is heartbroken. And he lives as a Christian. Ironically, even though he shook up the whole Jewish world and caused some major geopolitical shifts with districts in Italy wanting to secede from the Pope because he's not responsible, he's not respecting their freedom, even Italian non-Jews were shaken by this story. He ends up dying in an old age in Belgium in 1940, just a few months before the Nazis come in. So think about that. And there are still Catholics, by the way, who debate this issue. This child who would have been killed by the Nazis for being Jewish was taken away from his family and forced into life of Catholicism. And from what I heard, Steven Spielberg is working on a movie about this. But then again, there was some discussion of what should be of this movie. But as we go on, the Jews of Italy work for a unified and independent Italy, which is what you have today. And that sort of brings us a bit fast forward to the Holocaust. Italy is in a unique situation with regard to the Holocaust because Mussolini was a partner of Hitler. So in 1938 or 39, Italy puts in race laws, which say that Jews cannot hold public office, cannot go to universities, they need to be separate, etc. But they don't persecute them in the sense of they don't kill them. 1943, the Italians overthrow Mussolini, and it's almost exactly what happened in Hungary. The Nazis come in, and this is when they start the deportations and they start the killing of Italian Jews. Interestingly, of all the Jews that live in Italy, there are 44,500. Of those, in 2 years of Nazi rule, you have 7,680 killed, which is a terrible number. But if you think about it, it's less than a third are killed. And it really tells you a lesson about what happened in other countries in Europe. Because the fact that Italian non-Jews were decent human beings and saved the Jews and didn't tell on them and didn't collaborate with the Nazis the way, say, Ukrainians, Poles, Lithuanians, Germans, any number of countries, French, did, it really shows you how things could have been different in other places. So it's terrible. There's many Jews that are killed, but it's less than a third. A very tragic story is the Rabbi of Florence, Rabbi Nathan Casuto. He's one of these, he was a doctor, a rabbi. He's one of these legacy Italian families, and he's taken to Auschwitz in the very last days of the war. He's killed there. His wife, Hannah, is one of the people who survived the Holocaust. She goes with their 4 children to Israel. Tragically, does everyone know the story of the Hadassah nurses? So in 1948, a convoy, because Jerusalem was in a siege by the Palestinians, or whatever you want to call whoever was running the siege then, there's a convoy of medical personnel from Hebrew University, Hadassah Hospital, and they go between Mount Scopus and the main city, and there's an ambush, the road is blocked, and they are murdered. So this Hannah Casuto is also murdered, but their children live in Israel. Either way, the story of Italian Jewry is a fascinating one. A lot of our Judaica follows their style. They're beautiful. If you look at the synagogues in Italy, there's nothing like their Aron Kodesh, the ark that they have, the beauty of their poetry, their love for Hebrew, their love for Israel, and them being such an ancient community that sits in a place with so much history and so much going on is really an inspiration. If anyone has questions, we'll take questions. I see we may have All right. Yeah, so I see there's more about Edgardo Mortara. People are recommending the book by David Kurtzer. And yes, so make sure you read more about Mortara, and when the movie is out that you see it. And also when you go to Rome, make sure you get a certified guide and that it's someone from the Jewish community who knows the history. Yes.
Two questions. First is I was curious why the translation route that was preferred was from the Byzantine Greek to the Arab and then translated.
Yeah. So I'm just going to repeat the question so people on Zoom can hear it. Why was the translation that Jews did for the Italian people and for especially for the Vatican using the Greek to Arabic to Italian? Why was it that and not just directly from Greek to Italian? Yeah. So the answer to that, I don't know one answer, but at the time, the Muslim world was thriving intellectually. You know, you have algebra. There's a lot of stuff that was going on in the Muslim world that was not going on in the European world. So I imagine that if you had a work like Aristotle, it may have not been available for a few hundred years if you were not living in Egypt or in one of the Arab centers. So it's possible that there were just none of the Greek copies were available. That's a possibility.
The Byzantines weren't reprinting them or printing them correctly?
The Byzantines, if I remember correctly, were more extreme even than Rome in their Christianity, and so it's possible that just like the church encouraged illiteracy in many places and was not fostering a lot of intellectual conversations, could be the Byzantines got rid of it. But at the same time, I have to note, the Vatican is the one who's asking for these translations. So it's possible the Vatican woke up and said, we want a copy. But you wonder, how is this possible that the Vatican's library didn't have a copy and they needed a Jew to translate it from Arabic? Good question. Yeah.
What's happening in Italy now for Jews?
Very good question. First of all, in general, there's about 30,000 Jews. It's not a huge community. The Jews, I'll tell you a fascinating thing. The funding for synagogues in Italy comes from 1/8 of 1/8% of your taxes. Basically, when you pay your taxes, you can check which religious institutions you want your taxes to support. Even though we estimate there are about 30,000 Jews in Italy, more than 70,000 Italians, when they fill their taxes, they check that they want it to go towards restoring synagogues. So there's no question that there are many, many, many more people in Italy that have a Jewish grandparent, a parent, than we think. So it's not a huge Jewish community, but it's much more than we think. Because Italy was such an open society, you had more assimilation, and there are many more Italians than we think with Jewish ancestry. That being said, the community took a very big hit during COVID and is also has been struggling and actually strongly supported by the state of Israel. Fun fact, in 1948, a lot of the Aliyah to Israel of Holocaust survivors in ships, like the ships that ended up bringing the Mapilim, they call them, were leaving from Italy. A lot of the ships to Israel left from Italy. So Italy, in a sense, has a very glorious Zionist history.
Where do most of the people live? Jews?
There's Jews. Well, there's Rome, Milan, some in Venice. Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in Sicily since I'm younger, and Turkey. And in Sicily, I noticed before 2000, Jewish store in the book, jewelry store, a bookstore. I noticed the cemetery, and in 2001. First of all, Siracusa, where I go, has the oldest natural port in Italy.
Oh, wow.
And it is almost directly latitude and longitude to Israel. And the route to go Siracusa, Israel.
Let me just repeat it. So the oldest port in Italy is a city called Siracusa.
The oldest natural port.
The oldest natural port, and it goes directly to Israel. So that could be a reason why the Zionist movement, when they were bringing Jews out of DP camps, brought them mostly to Italy. There's a great Israeli song. Any Israelis in the audience? Okay. I'm just gonna say this. But if you're Israeli, there's a great song called Shir le Rav Chovel Italki, a song to an Italian sailor. Captain.
It's
Yeah.
much shorter than going up and around Turkey, which I've
Mhm.
driven across. It's massive. It's like
Mhm.
China.
Wow.
But in 2001, they found the oldest mikveh
Oh, really?
in Europe.
The
in
oldest
Syr-
mikveh in Europe, and it's
in
in
Syracuse.
Syracuse. Wow.
Now, since 2001, there is a Chabad and
Wow.
a Jewish.
I didn't know about that city. Okay, so let me just mention that because someone's asking about it. Which cities have traditionally had the largest Jewish communities? So I say Rome, Milan, but you also have Syracuse, Sicily,
Under the radar.
under the radar.
Until the mikveh came, and now there's a new community, and tourism is building up. Now.
Yeah. So what's the population of Jewish population of Sicily? Was it once 10%? From what I saw, it was 6%. And it was from Sicily. There were 6%. At some point, 6% of Sicily was Jewish. So yeah, look, Jews have been part and parcel of Italian society for very long, mostly Rome, but actually many in southern Italy, for the simple reason that if you arrive by ship from Israel or from Spain, you're likely to go to the southern part of Italy.
I have
Yeah.
After Rome destroyed the temple,
Yeah.
there were Jews allowed to stay in Israel, question, and two, the Jews that came to Rome as slaves, were they allowed later to go back to Israel, and did they?
Good question. Rome destroyed Israel twice. Rome destroyed Israel in the year 70. And by the way, this is also a little known fact.
Tomorrow we have a big day.
It
Me and
was
Are we going to Dunkin' in the morning?
the
I
Romans.
don't know. We want to.
The Romans, when they destroyed Israel, they did it in the year 70, and most people were not sent out. But in the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 123 or so, that was actually the bigger destruction. That's where the Jews were really ethnically cleansed from the land.
From Israel.
Yeah.
And then,
Oh, we have a picture here. Okay.
wait,
Yeah.
so after the destruction of the temple in Bar Kokhba, there were no Jews living in Israel?
There were Jews living in Israel after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, much fewer. But this is the mikvah in Syracuse. It's like Syracuse, I guess.
Yeah.
Syracuse. Wow.
And under the ground.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
after, with the slaves, they stayed in Rome, or they were allowed at some point?
So the number of Jews in Rome didn't expand hugely. The numbers in Ashkenaz, Poland, etc. did. I don't know. Not every slave was redeemed, but I'm assuming many did stay.
Thinking the temple was, this was the second temple.
Second temple, yes.
Okay, got it.
Bezrat Hashem, next week we will be speaking. I'm going to answer. Next week we'll be speaking about the Jews of Syria and Iraq, also in honor of you. But next week, the Jews of Syria and Iraq. Yeah, one more question for.
Sure that the chief rabbi of Rome converted to Catholicism during the war.
During the war, yes, that is true. There was a story like that. The chief rabbi of Rome converted during the Holocaust. There is, I did see that. Yes, that's a crazy story. And you have the other side of it, which is the Jewish Pope. You also had that.
Who is that?
One of the years they had a Jew who was taken away from his family, and just like a Cardinal, what was his name in New York? The Cardinal that was Jewish, the head of. No, but what was his?
Service.
Anyhow, yes.
Snacks?
Who?
Room service.
O'Connor, maybe?
You want some cucumber salad?
Or Cardinal Dolan?
Ice cream to foodie?
Anyhow, all right. Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Take the bath.
Everyone next week.